Welcome to this episode of Against the Mountains of Madness. I'm your host, Jason.
And I'm John C. Wright.
And on this episode, Within the Enemy Within, we're going to look at the classic Star Trek episode and some of the ideas in it from Season 1 of the original series, The Enemy Within, where Captain Kirk is subject to a transporter malfunction and split into good and evil Kirk. And it's a fun episode, particularly if you like to see William Shatner hamming it up as much as possible on screen. He just chews the scenery as evil Kirk. That's great.
I am convinced he is Captain Kirk. He says so. He delivers the line with great vehemence. So,
fair enough.
Should we give a summation of the episode? Because I think you already did. Basically, there's two plot lines. The first plot line is that the Enterprise is gathering samples from an unknown planet. A technician is wounded, falls, and beams aboard, but he has a contaminant on his suit with him, a soft yellow ore, which magnetically interferes with the transporter. Specifically, it interferes with the good-evil cycle of the ionizer of the infulator of the transporter, just so we're clear on that. So when Kirk beams up a moment later, he is divided into two halves, which they say on the show is good and evil, but maybe it's not. And the dog, an alien dog, is also beamed up and turns into Happy Dog and Snappy Dog. And then the episode is trying to identify which Kirk is the real Kirk, trying to get them back together. And the B plot, at the same time, because the transporter is broken, Sulu and the men on the planet are slowly freezing to death. They do try to beam down heating equipment to them, but the transporter is malfunctioning and divides the heating units in half, so they don't get warm. They spend some time heating up a rock with a phaser. They make a few jokes about freezing to death, and that's it. Let's see. Yep. Meanwhile, aboard the ship, the good version of Kirk gets more and more indecisive until finally he's almost unable to function
at all, yeah.
And the evil Kirk is restrained momentarily, and they at the very end they confront each other, and they realize that they need each other, that they're two halves of the same being. They hug, they step on the transporter, they get beamed back together, and I should say they experimented on the dog first and killed it. So when they tried to put the Snappy Dog and the Happy Dog together, so that there's some tension. There's Alexander Courage theme music building up the tension in the background as they're adjusting the controls of the transporter, and the transporter's blank for a moment, and everyone's looking at Spock with a worried look, thinking that he might be their next captain because Kirk might just turn into molecules and dissipate into the universe. But no, he turns back into himself. And this, I should say, the jerk Kirk, when he's first beamed aboard, the first thing he does is he goes to get some booze from his friend Dr. Bones McCoy, and the second thing he does is he goes and molests the hot ensign and Yeoman Rand. And she scratches his face. She slaps him away, and he escapes and is later captured. So, that is the basic plot. Greetings, world. This is John C. Wright. I and my compatriot, Jason Rennie, take up arms weekly against the mountains of madness that are afflicting and overwhelming the modern age. You are welcome here among like-minded souls, and I hope we have provided a work of insight, hope, or humor, and perhaps an explanation of the insanity that is the modern age. For more content and conversation on these and other fascinating topics of philosophy, science fiction, and current events, please visit our Substack at atmom.substack.com. Tips, bribes, and generous patronage are warmly encouraged. Thank you.
And that alien dog, oh my goodness.
You didn't like the alien dog?
The alien dog is just, it's just really obviously this dog in like a dodgy lion costume with a horn on its head and two
a unicorn dog.
It's just hilarious. Like, it's just such a...
I think that Star Trek did a bang-up job when compared with Doctor Who of cobbling together uniforms to make alien creatures look alien when they had no budget and, they had to throw it together. Yes, the dog costume is pretty funny. And they also did they vocalized the barking to make it sound like alien barking.
Oh, did they?
They put it through a filter. So.
Okay. Well, I thought the dog was Doctor Who level goofy. But
yes, I agree. But since I love since I love
just
original
fun,
Trek, I have to forgive it. If they did that thing with nowadays with complex CGI, it wouldn't be as near and dear to my heart.
I can forgive it. It was the 1960s. They worked with what they had. It's fine.
They worked with what they had.
But it was.
They worked with what they had, but it's still hilarious.
But it's just hilarious. Oh, I would note one plot hole. Does this era of the Enterprise not have shuttlecraft?
I was sitting there thinking that the whole time, and I realized this was the 5th show they made. They might not have had the models built yet. This was episode 5 of season 1.
That's true.
So the answer is I don't know. I don't know why. They did not even have a single line to say, "Oh, we can't send down the shuttlecraft because atmospheric conditions, blah blah blah."
Yeah,
and they don't have a backup transporter. They don't have an emergency transporter on some of their deck. It's just the one transporter room. See?
Yes, seems like a plot hole to me. But anyway.
Yes. Yep. But what did you think of the moment? And it comes as a surprise when Kirk transports up and he's a little woozy. So they leave the transporter room unattended for a moment and escort him out, and then a moment later the transporter turns itself on by itself and all the lights flash ominously, and then you see a figure facing the wrong way on the transporter pad, and the camera pans in and it turns around and surprise, it's Kirk.
It's Kirk lit from below with an
lit
evil leer
from
on his
below
face. It's a funny scene. I mean, like, it's just, he looks, as I said, he just chews the scenery magnificently as evil Kirk.
But he didn't even say a line in that scene. They just lit it from below, and they had the Alexander Courage theme music blare out an ominous chord. So you knew something really wrong had gone on. You knew something really terrible had happened. You see? So, and now, as a science fiction guy, what do you think of the use of a transporter to divide you into good and evil halves? Does that technologically or in any other way make sense to you?
Not particularly, but I've always thought Star Trek transporters, they have leaving aside the whole, they have so many accidents with the damn things. But they never do any of the obvious things you would do with them. If you had this technology, they'd never do things like, who would ever need to go to the bathroom again? Just beam the waste products away. Heck, why even have a whole crewed starship? Why not just put all of the crew in the pattern buffer, have a much smaller ship, and just fly to your destination, rematerialize them as needed?
Yes.
Yeah. I understand it's basically just a way of getting from point A to point B without having to have a tedious scene in a shuttlecraft.
And also it saved, look at the money they saved. They had, instead of having otherwise they'd have to have a scene where there was a takeoff and a landing every time. Now, in the TV show Space 1999, there were, a Moonbase Alpha had these really good-looking models called Eagles. And they just delighted in doing a lot of model work for alien landscapes and having the ships land and take off and so on and so forth. But that was, they had a healthy budget, and that was the main appeal of the show, was the model work of Sylvie and Jerry Anderson. But for Star Trek, they wanted to use one model of the ship, and they just wanted to appear and disappear when they needed to get you onto the scene and off again without having to land and take off.
I get it.
But as the show went on, they added more and more features to the Star Trek transporter to make it ridiculous. And Dr. Bones McCoy is right. No one in his right mind would ever step in that thing. Because theologically speaking, what happens if you die every time, and then when you're reconstituted, it's another person? Are there dozens of you in heaven now? How do you know it's the same soul involved? Does the soul get transferred too? Or
that was an idea like that was done in the Reality Dysfunction books by Peter F. Hamilton, where it turns out people die and have a soul, and then the main sort of instigating event is the souls are coming back from the other side and possessing humans. And it's actually not a bad series. I didn't think it ended great, but it wasn't bad. But the actual series, the books are really good if long. I just thought the ending felt a little like just, I don't know how to finish this, and It was a bit unfortunate, but I mean, still, I still enjoyed it. I've read it a couple of times, but
Well, speaking
there's
of
a scene in
endings,
it.
excuse me, go ahead.
I was going to say, there's a scene in it where there's an evil sort of corrupt character that's found a way to clone himself, and he basically just moves his consciousness into the next body and throws the old body away, and then thinks, oh, I'll need to keep these in stasis now, because the assumption is there's a whole lot of them in the next. There's like each time he finishes with the body, it ends up with another soul on the other side somewhere. So you could,
theologically speaking, if Star Trek had asked me, I would merely say that the soul is in a parallel higher dimension and telephones its commands to the body and receives sense information from the body. So it doesn't matter where the body goes or how many copies you make, it would still be the same person, it would still be the same one soul, you know. But that would be theologically dubious. What's that?
That's Cartesian dualism, isn't it? Effectively, that's certainly not Catholic theology on the soul and the body.
I consider it to be incarnation. That if you beam the host from one spot to another with a Star Trek transporter, is it still Christ when it arrives? I would say yes, because he can incarnate as he will.
Well, this is true.
So I don't know if necessarily you have to be. Do you have to be a Cartesian dualist to get aboard a Star Trek transporter? I mean, it dissolves your body, and in this episode, it can dissolve your mind. Clearly, the evil half of your brain, which has to be a cluster of molecules to the left of your brain, is put in one body, and your good half is put into another. And they must be magnetizable, because I think they mentioned that the yellow ore had a magnetic property.
Had some sort of magnetic property. Well, I mean, yeah, like, you know, the plot
on
some level
is
goofy,
element,
but
they found out later that the yellow ore is called plot contrivium.
Plot contrivium?
Is the name of that? Is the name of that element? Yes.
Oh well, I mean, yeah, like the plot itself is goofy in that I don't know how conceptually this could actually happen, but that's okay. Well,
think of it as an excuse. I looked up the guy's name,
exactly.
Richard Matheson. Richard Matheson is the guy who wrote I Am Legend, from which the movie Omega Man was made, and also I Am Legend. He also wrote several Star Trek episodes, including one starring Captain Kirk of the Terror at 20,000 Feet, where Kirk sees a gremlin tearing apart the wing of the... Yeah, Twilight Zone. I'm sorry. What did I say?
You said Star Trek.
Twilight Zone episode. He wrote Twilight Zone episodes in addition to the Star Trek episode. So I think he would... Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and Terror at 20,000 Feet is one of those great classic episodes where William Shatner, again, chews the scenery.
Gets to choose the scenery.
You wouldn't believe. But
I've heard that in Hindu...
The dude's a ham, but he's fun.
I like him as a ham. I love ham sandwich, so... I've heard that in Bollywood, Hindu actors love playing in roles where they get separated into good and evil twins, or have good and evil twins, because then they can have to show their range of acting, showing both their good half and their bad half. So Shatner must have loved doing this episode. You can just see by how much how he screams at the camera, "I'm Captain Kirk! I'm Captain Kirk!" It was great. Okay, yes. But I think Matheson, the guy who wrote, the guy was a horror writer, not a science fiction writer. So I don't think he cared about the scientific nature of how do you get divided into good and evil. He was trying to make a statement about the nature of good and evil in the human soul. And just between you and me, I have to ask... Well, no, let me ask you this question. What did you think of the ending, and did you think it was a satisfactory ending? Do you think it was actually evil and good Kirk? Because just between you and me, I don't.
No, neither do... No, I what struck me is St. Thomas Aquinas talks about the reason and the passions that people have, and... If I understand correctly, perhaps I don't, at least in Catholic theology, the idea is that the passions are more fallen than the reason. And I think what we were seeing with Split Kirk was, in a sense, rational Kirk and passionate Kirk. And his passions were unrestrained. Because, I mean...
In the episode, he himself calls himself Animal Kirk when he's pretending to be a good Kirk and he's talking to young Rand. So,
yeah.
At least that character in the show called it an animal thing.
Well, but that's it. I thought it was one Kirk is his passions unrestrained, and the other Kirk is his
intellect unmotivated.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good way to phrase it. Because I thought it was interesting. In the scene where he attacks Yeoman Rand, the implication is, like he's going to rape her, but he was interrupted.
Yeah.
But he doesn't just storm into the room and try to rape her. There's a couple of scenes where he's trying to do something and then gets thwarted in some degree, and then gets frustrated and turns violent.
Right.
But it's I don't know if it's intentional in the writing or I'm reading into it, but like
no, you're not. If you're reading into it, so am I. In the scene with Yeoman Rand, he is smooth at first, and he says, "Oh, just call me Jim, and I'll call you Janice. We don't have to pretend anymore. You don't have to fight me."
Yeah.
Then he gets her in a clinch, and then he starts wrestling with her, and then she gets, obviously she gets upset at that point, and then when he gets frustrated, then he starts to get, toss her on the floor and so on and so forth, and she's saved by a guy who comes by, and he chases after the guy and
beats him,
punches him down, beats him down. Right. So just acting on impulse. Okay. So when I saw this episode, I turned to my son and I asked him the same question I just asked you. Is this really good and bad? He said no. He said this is Wimp Kirk, Wimpy Kirk, and Jerk Kirk. Okay, because the guy is just a jerk. He's not evil. He's just. Excuse me. Unless you want to define evil as unrestricted passion, he's not evil. Unrestricted passion is he's like a guy who's drunk, right?
Sort of. I mean,
he does have enough self-command when he's not thwarted to be a little smooth. He's able to mimic being good Kirk for a few minutes at least, until he gets frustrated. Yeah. See. Now, there's two things in this show. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, I thought it was fascinating that it's his. Jerk Kirk is maybe not a bad way to phrase it. I mean, he's the Kirk you would wind up with if he had zero self-control and just gave in to every momentary whim and passion.
Right.
And rational Kirk is sort of the other. Wimp Kirk is he's always dithering without the ability to make a decision. Well, he's
say it several times in the show.
Critically indecisive.
That his ability to command springs from his dark side. That's the theme of the show. That's the point of the show.
Oh yeah.
Now, I myself don't believe that. I don't buy that model of psychology, because I think what Richard Matheson was saying is I think he believed either tacitly or implicitly in the Freudian model of human psychology, which says that your superego is a group of inhibitions and the source of your reason. In the show, they explicitly say that Captain Kirk's courage comes from his cold, logical, rational self, but that the cold, logical, rational self is also indecisive. They actually use the word rational and logical to describe his good side, the intellectual side.
I actually thought they were saying his courage comes from a combination of the two. He can't be courageous just as rational Kirk.
No, if you remember, there's a scene where the jerk Kirk is strapped to the medical bed, and his heart is pumping and he's panicking. Good Kirk goes in and holds his hand and says, "I'm going to be here. I'm going to hold your hand," and his heartbeat relaxes. And when he steps out of the room, both Bones and Spock say to him, "Your courage comes from your intellect," which I thought was a strange thing to say, because that's not what they had seemed to set up in the show.
That's not how.
They said he panicked. They said he panicked. He gives into his fear.
Yeah. No, I get that, but his courage is sort of his passionate side tempered by his rational side. Is the way I took it, at least.
That wasn't in the show. That wasn't in the text. That's the way I would have interpreted it also. But that's not what they said. Now they could be wrong, or maybe I misunderstood the line.
Maybe. I mean,
but they did say his command ability definitely comes from his dark side. His decisiveness comes from his.
Yeah.
And they defined it as aggression, passion, and what else did they say? Impulse or something like that.
Mm.
Now here's what I don't buy about the whole thing. I have both good passions and bad passions. My patriotism, for example, is fundamentally emotional rather than intellectual. and I think it's a good passion. You see what I'm saying? My love for my wife is deeply passionate. Now, it's also an act of the will. And they wanted to have the willpower come from the dark side. And that's very Freudian and very modernistic, and I just think it's a bunch of hooey. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah.
What you would really do, if he had really been divided into good Kirk and evil Kirk, if you let me be Catholic for just a moment. Evil is a deprivation of the good. Evil is the diseased form of the good. So the good Kirk would have all good qualities, which is to say he would be temperate, just, noble, brave, and moderate. Okay, probably. And evil Kirk would be immoderate, dispassionate. Not dispassionate, passionate, immoderate, cowardly.
Yeah.
Which they kind of played with. They kind of said he was, and violent. And they would take evil Kirk and throw him out the airlock, and good Kirk would then be a paragon. He would actually have no weaknesses at that point, and he would run everyone through that transporter. All the men in your military would go right through that transporter, and they'd all come out as courageous and just and even-tempered. And, okay, that's not a Catholic transporter. It did not divide him into good and evil. It divided him into wimpy and jerky.
That's true. It's interesting. They did a similar gag with in Red Dwarf, where they had a duplicating device, and they duplicate a strawberry at the start, and the Lister tries the first strawberry, and it's like, this is divine. This is the best strawberry I've ever had. And then he eats the other one, and it's like maggot filled, and it's just rotten and awful.
Like the barky puppy.
Yeah. And then they duplicate, and then the crew gets duplicated, and. Well, yeah, this is it. The good ones basically when they're split in two, unlike in this, the good ones all basically become monks, and they're like wandering around in monks' robes, and they're all like, spiritual and good and at peace and everything. And the evil ones are just complete degenerates. And
well, it shows you the difference between the Catholic view of good and evil, than the Red Dwarf view of good and evil, and Richard Matheson, who, like I said, was a horror writer. So he wants to say that we have a dark side within us, which we need, and that was the point of the show. The point of the show is they couldn't throw evil Kirk out the airlock. They had to reintegrate him with the good Kirk and put both sides back in balance, because both sides needed the other, which I think is hooey, but... If it was your passion and your reason, yes, you can't have reason without passion. You can't have passion without reason. Certainly.
Well,
if it was your id and your super ego, yes, you can't have your conscience without your consciousness, and you can't have your subconscious without your conscience. So, Matheson was trying to make it seem spooky, because one of the lines in the show is, Kirk says, "I saw a side of myself no man should see. No man should know how evil he can become." Which didn't land on my ear quite right. Maybe I'm too Christian, because I just thought, man, Kirk, have you never been to confession? Have you never? I mean, have you never noticed Yeoman Rand walking by and stared at her pert bottom or something like a normal man would do? You pervert, Kirk. I'm sure he has, because we just saw that he was sweet on her in that episode. That was the whole point of the episode. Is that was one of the impulses he held in check. You see.
Well,
but the other thing he held in check was his love of the Enterprise. When he's shouting and screaming and chewing the scenery, he's saying, "This is my ship. This is my ship.
My ship." Yeah.
Yeah. Well, isn't that a good quality?
Well, it's unbalanced in
unbalanced.
Evil Kirk.
Unbalanced. This was a Taoist kind of episode where the yin and the yang were separated from each other, and one was passive and one was active. You see, that's also another way that you could define the split. Like, one side got all his parasympathetic nervous system, and the other side got his prefrontal cortex, or I don't know how it works in the transporter. Why do they even have a good and evil setting? So.
Someone set this goal to evil.
Never flip the evil switch and the humor switch at the same time.
But actually, I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was C.S. Lewis, and I'm pretty sure it was The Great Divorce. But he has one of his characters talking about this sort of duality of man. Like, he was referring to sort of all the great sinners from history, and all of the great... Oh, no, it must have been the Screwtape Letters.
It was Screwtape Proposes a Toast, which is the...
Is that where it's from?
Was printed as an epilogue to Screwtape Letters. I believe that's what you're talking about. Well, the great sinners of old were really passionate and really did outrageous things, and the modern sinners are just tepid hypocrites. That's There is a passage like that.
There's a passage like that. There's a passage like that in Screwtape Proposes a Toast, and they're all lamenting that the sinners they get these days are just really crappy quality. They'll do, but like I'm glad we're getting more souls to hell, but
right.
Why bother? They barely rise to the level of worth damning. Give me one of the great sinners. No, I think it was The Great Divorce. It was talking about like Tamerlane and Genghis Khan, and I thought of Hitler, and all of these men in many ways they're quite. I mean, this might sound weird, but they embody many virtues.
Yes.
Like they're courageous. Hitler was a great orator.
It doesn't sound weird to me at all. It doesn't sound weird to me at all. If you're the devil and you want to corrupt someone, you corrupt him in one area, but you leave all his other virtues intact. Otherwise, he won't be effective. Yeah, if he's not a brave robber is more dangerous than a cowardly robber. Okay, a brilliant orator who's evil is more dangerous than a lax, lazy, mealy-mouthed orator who's evil. You see. I mean, Hitler's more dangerous than, I don't know, Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi, because those are kind of mealy-mouthed orators. They're not great public speakers. They can't command a crowd. But Hitler could. Okay? Now, pointing out that the bad guy has a good side doesn't mean I'm on his side. I think it makes him more dangerous. If I look at an enemy and I say, that guy's smart, he makes strong moves, I'm not complimenting him. I'm saying that makes him worse. You see?
Yes.
And that runs throughout Christian theology. Lucifer was not the least of the angels who fell. He was the greatest of them. He was the morning star. He wanted to put his throne above the highmost. He wanted to put his throne above God. You see. So that's why this show always kind of rubbed me the wrong way, because I don't share Matheson's idea of darkness and light. I don't think goodness is inconsequential and ephemeral. Now, if you want to say the intellect without the passions, you cannot. The intellect without the passions, even in my own life, I can't just make an intellectual decision without my willpower and have it come to pass. It's not enough for me just to know something in my mind.
You need some desires to push things in different directions.
But he also describes the passions as animalistic, which I guess is fair. Some passions are animalistic, but some are higher and directed at nobler ends. And he doesn't. That can't be in his binary system.
But are these the tamed passions that are behaving as they should?
Oh no, that's a good point. I take it back. You're right. This show's about tamed versus untamed passions, isn't it?
In many ways. I mean, like, at least it's the combination of the two. You can't. His sort of his sort of out of control love for the ship and wanting to be in command and to rule over people, and it's like it needs to be tempered by his reason and kept in check. If it's not kept in check, it spirals out of control. I mean, I agree with you. I suspect this probably wasn't the writer's intent. He would have agreed with that sort of, your id is all of your evil desires and your superego is your reason, and that was sort of the division that he was trying to portray. But
it was popular in the 60s to talk that way. Yeah, and it was trying to, like good science fiction, it was trying to make the readers think about something that they hadn't. It was a new point of view. It was different from the classical correct view of good and evil that most of the audience had at the time. It's kind of a spooky idea. What if I actually need my evil side? What if I need sins to help balance the force or something? Sorry. I'm trying to be fair, but I can't be. It's always struck me as being a stupid concept. It's not. Yin and yang in the Orient are not good and evil. They're active and passive. And you do need ebb and flow. You do need active energy and passive energy to get things done, and also to pause between getting things done, and so on and so forth. You need a masculine and feminine approach to everything in the universe. But in the show, they initially call it good and evil, and later Spock, of all people, says, this is what you humans on Earth call good and evil, but I recognize it as being the one side is your intellect and your reason, but doesn't have any command ability, doesn't have any force of will. And the other side is the dark, aggressive, passionate side, which is where you get your strength from, you see. And that's the point of the show. The show would have been boring if his strength of will had come from the good side, and the evil side was just both cowardly and wimpy and
Everything that was
passionate
left
and
over,
lustful
yes.
and greedy and was just a mass of sins with nothing. Sin is self-destructive in real life, not in the show. In the show,
Well-
the dark side has a energy to it, has a power to it that you need to, I don't know, get up in the morning or something. You know, but in real life, no. In real life, sin is just a disease. It's self-destructive. All sins, if you indulge them, will eventually do you in.
Of course. I did. One of the things I thought was interesting was the passionate side of Kirk was very, very short term in all of his thinking. Like he wants the brandy, so he takes the brandy. He wants to seduce.
He wants the
young
yeoman,
Rand.
so he goes into
So he
pleasure,
does,
yeah.
and when he's frustrated, he attacks her. I mean, all of this is. There's no ability to plan on his part as well. Well, not particularly. He's got very short-term
He's got
plans.
a certain charm to him when he's trying to be deceptive, which he does in two scenes where he tries to mimic being good Kirk. But you're right, no long-term thinking. So I think the point there is that long-term thinking is a matter of the intellect, which goes with the good side. You see, I think this thing came from a very modern psychological point of view where education and intellect are the source of your goodness. And oddly enough, you and I might disagree on this point. I think the show said it was also the source of his courage, was his intellect restraining his passions, but also guiding his passions because he needed the passions like a rider needs a horse. You can't be an equestrian without a powerful horse underneath you. But if the horse slips the reins, it's just going to run hither and yon untamed and trample things.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Show.
Yeah, no, I think that was the point. You need to control. Your intellect needs to ride herd on your passions and keep them in check.
Isn't it funny that you and I are talking about a show if the theme of the show was the importance of self-control? I can't think of another show that shows the importance of self-control. Wasn't that what it was about, though?
Yeah, in a lot of ways. But also, but the flip side of that, it was also you needed to be self-controlled. Like you couldn't be... actually, I think it was... Okay, I don't know if it was originally Jordan Peterson that said this or he was quoting someone. But he observed... He was talking about being a good man. And he observed that a good man needs to be a dangerous man, but have that dangerous side under control.
He would have appreciated this show then.
I think so, but a good man is one who's capable of violence and capable of all of these sorts of things, but has them in check. Because if you're not capable of these sort of things, you're not a good man. Or if you're not capable of these sort of things, but have them in check and under control, you're not a good man. You're a harmless man.
Right.
And these are not the same thing at all.
That was why Kirk was portrayed as harmless. He couldn't even give orders. He couldn't even make decisions. See? I think Jordan Peterson would have agreed with the show based on what you just said.
I suspect so.
Because why do we send soldiers to boot camps? Why do we send 18-year-old guys to boot camp? Is it to learn how to be aggressive and mean? No, it's to learn discipline. It's to learn how to take orders. It's to learn how to channel their aggression to the enemy. The drill sergeant yells at them, and they get pissed off, and they go kill the enemy. You see? So when the passions slip the reins, what have you got? Well, in this show, we followed... I said there were two plots, an A plot and a B plot. One was Sulu freezing, and one was Kirk being divided. But maybe there were three plots, because what is the character arc of good Kirk? He does go through a character arc. He at first is not sure why there's an imposter on board. He then says, let's tell the crew everything that happened. And Spock upbraids him. Spock says, you can't do that!
Yeah.
And he says, no, why not? And Spock says, have you forgotten everything? You have to be perfect in the eyes of the crew. And you can't show any weakness. And so you have to not tell them that there's an evil version of you running around on deck 5. So you have to pretend it's an imposter or something. And Kirk says, yes, the noble lie. I will now fib and lie to my crew like a complete fibber. He doesn't actually say those lines, but that's what I heard in my head when I was going, wait a minute, Spock? Why is Spock, of all people, advocating for the noble lie? Does he really think humans need to think their COs are infallible? No one in the military thinks the CO is infallible. What would you talk about at the scuttlebutt if you thought your sergeant wasn't an idiot? I mean, you have to have leadership ability, sure. There's
But
a
you have to
degree of
respect
charisma
them.
involved, sure.
But you have to respect them enough to follow them.
Right.
I think that was
right.
what I thought that's what he was driving at, which is the crew can't see you as this feckless, indecisive mess that you've become without your passionate half.
But I'll point out to you, he had not become feckless and indecisive by that point. That was really early on. He becomes more indecisive as the show goes on. That's part of his story arc. And his story arc is that he eventually comes to realize that he's got to reconcile with his evil side, and that he can't hurt the evil side, and it's got to come back into him, even though he doesn't want it back at first because it's a dark side, you see. And then later he says, that's the side of me that no one should ever see. That's his story arc. Now I'm going to ask another question. Was there a character arc for Jerk Kirk, for the evil Kirk? I'm not sure there was, because I'm not sure what his goals were, what he was trying to do. He was just acting on impulse. There's no real drama there. He spends most of the show tied to a medical bed. See? Once or twice he gets out and he's kind of a threat, or he's hiding in the engineering
He's
deck.
not. Yeah, I don't think Jerk Kirk is a character as such.
So is evil Kirk the real Kirk that we're supposed to sympathize with, the intellect of Kirk, that needs his mojo back, needs his bad side back to get his magical powers back? I'm being slightly facetious because I kind of don't agree with the premise of the show, but that's what the drama is. It's still a good show.
Yeah.
Is that what his character arc is?
Maybe there was. It could be like it's Kirk reconciling with that part of him that he doesn't like, and the part of him that he doesn't like. It's more a force of nature than anything else. It's not. It doesn't really rise.
Is
to the
it
level
just
of the
me, or
character.
does Jerk Kirk finally break down, cry, and get a big hug from Good Kirk at the very end? Does Jerk Kirk recognize that he actually needs evil Kirk?
I think so. I
Good
think that's
Kirk back again, because he kind of says, "I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back." That's his last line. But then he needs a hug, to be all together. It's lonely being evil Kirk. People are against you. You can't get what you want.
There was also that really disturbing bit where they're talking to Yeoman. I mean, it disturbed me, but I thought it was interesting.
At the very end?
Yeoman Rand is being interviewed at one point, and she's saying, like, well, I would have let it happen and not talk to anybody, but you attacked me. And I wouldn't have mentioned it. Like, it would have been, I was like, wow.
It's set up in the show notes for the Star Trek show. Yeoman Rand was supposed to be sweet on Kirk, and it was slightly reciprocated, and they were supposed to not be able to do anything about it because of the command structure, because he can't fraternize with the crew. There was supposed to be a tension between them in the show.
Okay.
Now they did a similar thing with Spock and the nurse. The nurse was supposed to be sweet on Spock, but that kind of played out more organically and more naturally. I don't remember that Yeoman Rand drops out after the first season. I don't remember that anything ever comes of that, or that ever goes anywhere.
But
by the way, this show was before they introduced Uhura. This is pre-Uhura days.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And when Uhura first comes on, the very first show she's on, she flirts with Spock, and they never do it again. They never touch that show that again. But she goes over to Spock and says, "Tell me about the moons of Vulcan," and he says, "Vulcan has no moons," and she rolls her eyes and says, "I knew it," So I thought it was kind of cute, but Matheson handles the scene really awkwardly. There's a second bit that I found disturbing that's not. I thought you were going to mention, but you mentioned a different scene. At the very end, the last line is Spock turns and quirks an eyebrow at Rand and says, "Well, the imposter certainly had some interesting qualities, didn't he?" And she looks kind of shocked and offended and puts her nose in the air and turns away. And I thought, wait a minute, did I just miss something? What was he implying there? Was she kind of attracted to aggressive, passionate, animalistic Kirk? Was there a scene that was cut out that I'm not aware of, or maybe a line that's missing? Was the implication that the animal side of you is the sexy side? Because I've also seen Freudians make that argument too, that women are attracted to the bad boys, that evil is alluring or necessary for the procreation of the species or something. Did you get that? Am I just reading into it? Am I just hallucinating here, or did you see something like that?
I think there's something to that. There's a thing called in oh, among sort of pickup artist types and stuff called the dark triad of personality traits, and it's basically more or less sociopathy. But I think that, well, I think they might have been driving at something like that. The sort of evil Kirk, passionate Kirk is alluring and sort of sexy and commanding in a bad boy sort of way.
Yeah.
But
If so, they played the scene wrong. The scene was short, but if so, they played it wrong. He should have been in there and said, he's staring at her, he's ogling her when she's looking in the mirror, which is supposed to be really creepy, which it is, because he's now a stalker. And he goes, "Hey, Janice, just call me Jim." She should have looked attracted or a bit allured to him at that point, if that was the point they wanted to make. To me, it looked like she was just confused and annoyed that a superior officer was in her cabin calling her by the first name, and his pickup line, "Let's stop pretending." They didn't give her a chance to react to that. I would have actually been curious as to what her reaction would be, because would she stand up for principle, or would she also let her animal side, stick her in the transporter? Let's see, passionate Yeoman Rand, would that have come out? Because that was one theme they didn't touch on. How do the other crewmen react to evil Kirk and good Kirk? Did their evil side kind of acknowledge and recognize bad boy Kirk, and is he kind of cool? But no, I don't think they did that. I don't think they really meant it to be evil Kirk. I'm repeating myself now, but it was just uncontrolled Kirk. It was just jerk, and the guy was just a jerk. Of course, the women would not be attracted to him. He was a jerk. So Spock leering at the end struck me as being a really wrong note. So wrong that I thought that a scene might have been cut out. It looked like something that had been set up. It looked like a payoff without a setup, if you know what I'm saying. And how come they didn't have shuttlecraft? That was another plot hole. So.
Well, yes, I got to be honest. Many women do seem to be attracted to guys
yes,
that
I
are
agree.
not good for them.
I agree, and I'm gonna turn back on everything I just said by saying, a lot of women look at jerks and they see someone who's confident and straightforward and is bold enough to ask them out, whereas the nice guys are usually too mild-mannered to actually.
That's true. But
go
they're
up
mistaking.
Go up and say, "Hey, baby, I make a lot of money. Hang out with me." That's, by the way, that's one of my famous pickup lines that never worked on anyone ever at the beginning of time. Hey, baby.
Probably just didn't deliver it with enough confidence.
No. I also suffered a transport accident when I was young. Before I was married, I had no confidence with chicks, and after I was married, I had a chick, so I didn't need it.
Didn't need it anymore.
Yeah, no, marriage is like a transporter accident. If you think about it, it turns your evil side into goodness. Oh, speaking of the Great Divorce, there's a scene in the Great Divorce where a man sees his sins, his evil side, like a horrible mutant monkey or something biting on his neck.
Like a lizard,
And
a
then-
little lizard on his neck.
Like a lizard, yeah, it's a lizard. And then it
It
turns
keeps
into a
trying to
noble
tempt him back,
steed.
yeah.
It turns into something powerful. And the narrator makes the observation that a man's passionate sins can turn into equally passionate virtues. Now, if the Star Trek show is trying to make a comment along those lines, that's something I would agree with, because I think C.S. Lewis is right about that. Can you turn... Because let me put it to you this way. I was a vehement atheist before I became a Christian, okay? And I'm an equally vehement Christian, so my vehemence has not changed. I just changed my coat from blue to red, and I'm now fighting on the other side, okay? But my skill at arms is the same. But a Laodicean, a milquetoast, a nice guy who's only worshiping nice Christ and not manly Christ, or a nice atheist who is an atheist because he doesn't want to offend his Jewish or his Muslim friends, so he's not really Christian. You know what I'm saying? There are guys who are atheists because they think it is the neutral position, believe it or not. They think it is non-controversial. Those guys can't be turned into saints. I mean, there's nothing to them. They'd have to grow a backbone first. Do you think the show was trying to say something like that?
Maybe that the difference between a great sinner and a great saint is less than you'd think.
That would be kind of a spooky thing to say, and that would actually be kind of haunting and thought provoking.
Well, I think it's probably, in one sense, it's true as well. I mean, the outcome between the two is very different, but they need. Well, as Lewis was saying, they need some great virtues to be but to be a truly bad man. You need some amount of, you need to be relatively virtuous. You need some virtues.
Yeah. Probably
even to a high degree.
I agree, because
it needs to go bad, basically.
Because I'm sorry, I talked over you. Finish.
So it's just those virtues need to be corrupted and go bad, or need to be used to corrupt ends, but they still need to be present.
Right.
Like Kirk couldn't have been the commander he was without the both halves. Like the sort of milquetoast, indecisive, rational, I guess, Kirk could never have commanded the ship, but passionate, out of control, evil Kirk never could have commanded the ship either. He, right at the end, he was ready to abandon Sulu and stuff. Just it's too hard. We're out. We
can't save them.
Not even like, inform them, I'm sorry, we have to leave you behind. There's nothing we can do. We're just going to abandon them.
Yeah.
Without even worrying about it. Actually, that was one of the things that struck me in the episode. That line with Rand, where she said, "Well, I would have let it happen, and I wouldn't have said anything if we hadn't been interrupted." But also later in the episode, when he's commanding them to leave, and the guy's confused, but he's going to follow the order.
He's going to follow orders, yeah. Because he's military. You follow orders.
Well, but I mean, it's interesting. It sets up. There's a conundrum there because you're not supposed to follow illegal orders. But
technically, that order would not be illegal. It might be very unwise, but we can't save them. There's no point in hanging around. Take us out of orbit.
Well, true. It's a callous order, but I mean,
yeah.
But Yeoman Rand would have been willing to let a crime, an obviously illegal act, pass because he's the captain, and
she didn't want to get him in trouble because she's kind of sweet on him.
I guess that's why you have rules against fraternization, because
right.
The observation about power imbalances is not actually completely wrong. It gets goofy, but it's not wrong.
Let me tell you why that scene was disturbing. That scene was disturbing to me because I think it is more true than what we nowadays in the Me Too movement era talk about. She would have consented had he not pressed the matter. Okay? And consent is what modern people take as the be-all and end-all of good. Good is whatever you consent to. Bad is whatever you do not consent to. Okay? That is so wrong-headed, and we saw it in this episode.
Well, yeah.
If she would have gone along with it, that still would have been against the military code of justice. You're not allowed to fraternize with your inferiors. Okay? And in the Christian worldview, you're not allowed to copulate with anyone except for your lawfully wedded wife. Okay, so put a ring on her finger. If you're that passionate about her, if you love her that much, then make the oath. Okay, so and if you don't make the oath, then I spit on your love. It's not real. Okay, well, that's my Christian opinion speaking here.
That's fair.
The reason, so we nowadays pretend that women always disagree when they don't want to have sex, but women are actually kind of agreeable creatures. They tend to go along with more than men do. They tend not to dig in their heels as much. If there's a leadership figure, they'll go along with it more often than not, you see, even if the guy's leading him in a bad way. So if he says, "Hey, Christina, call me Jim. Let's not pretend anymore." I noticed she didn't say, "Pretend about what? I have no affection for you."
Yes.
Because that's not what the setup was. That was what made the scene disturbing, was that was not the setup. The setup was she was actually sweet on the guy. Because he was young and handsome and bold, and he saved the Enterprise, and so on and so forth. But the scene where she was crying and stuff was disturbing, because she, I'm sorry, that's also why you have rules like that in place, because even if she had been even if she had been willing to cover for it, the military code of justice should have slapped that kind of thing down, because you don't want to have good Kirk give in to evil Kirk. Which reminds me of another question. I have a question I hope you'll find interesting. Here's what this last scene did not do. The last scene was both of them. They're standing with the evil Kirk, had the gun drawn, had the phaser drawn on good Kirk, and was going to blast in. And Kirk was saying, "You can't kill me because we're two halves of the whole. Okay, you're going to die if you kill me." And medically, he was degenerating. He was getting weaker as time went on. I think they said that in the plot.
Yeah.
And he takes the gun out of his hand, and the evil Kirk goes, no, I don't want to go back. And then he gives him a big warm, wet, sloppy hug, and they want to be together even though they don't admit it because they're one being. Okay. Here's what did not happen. Good Kirk didn't go up to sinful Kirk and say, you are a part of me that is ugly. I'm going to go to confession, and then I'm going to beat you up and conquer you and make you subservient to me so that you will use your energy and your passion as I direct for my good and for the greater glory of God. And then boom, 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 bound him into the ground until evil Kirk says, I concede, I agree, I will do as you say. I will use my evil powers for good. I will live in the past and the present and the future. The spirits did it all in one day. Oh, wait a minute, that's a completely different story. Because the other problem with the story, and this actually is a problem with the whole story arc, is Kirk at the beginning of the story, before he's split in two, does not have a internal mental conflict between his good and evil sides, which by splitting them in two then gets reconciled and gets resolved to a happier ending. Now that's because it's an episode of an ongoing show. You see what I'm saying? But if this had been A Christmas Carol by Dickens, there would have been something wrong with Kirk at the beginning, which being split in two would teach him something that would improve him at the end. And so I did not see something as a writer I would have liked to see, which is at the end when he goes, now I'm in touch with my dark side and I'll be even more commanding and sexier, or something. There was no resolution. We were back to square one again. And square one is admittedly something, according to the story, is the dark side of man's nature that no man should ever see, Now, also, I'm a fan of Spock, and I think Spock came off worse in this show than practically any other show. When he says, I'm sorry if I'm an insensitive jerk, but that's the way I am, because I'm an insensitive jerk. What, really, Spock? That you come from the planet of jerks? Yes, Vulcan, we're all just really blunt, and we don't care about emotions, and we're just jerks. Thank you, Spock.
And he smokes.
He says when he's arguing with Dr. McCoy, now this is actually dramatic, they throw the puppy through the transporter to try to blend it back together. It dies of shock, okay? Yes. Because the good and evil can't be reconciled with each other. The animal was confused and dies because he panicked or something. Because we all know people die of panic attacks or something.
I didn't think that was totally unbelievable.
No, not totally. No, this was cromulent. And I thought it was reasonable for Spock, for the doctor to say, let's do a full autopsy first to figure out what killed this animal so it doesn't happen to you. And then they say, well, Sulu is running out of time. We have to act now. Okay, it's perfectly reasonable, and it's rather dramatic, because you really don't know if Kirk is going to die, except for it's only the fifth show of the season.
Except it's the fifth show, and they made a bunch more.
Well, in character, you don't know. Okay, you're still suspending disbelief because you're a good loyal viewer. So it was dramatic. So when Spock and Bones, who are the two halves of Kirk, the intellect and the passions of Kirk, did you see that thematic parallel there?
Yeah.
Spock is Wimp Kirk and Bones is Jerk Kirk. But Spock never acts wimpy. They never show him as indecisive, even though he's a man of pure intellect. And Bones, they never show Bones as being impulsive, even though he's the man who's supposed to represent the conscience and the passion of Kirk's half of his mind. I think they set it up symbolically so that his two best friends represented the two halves of his character.
It's interesting that right at the end, when they're trying to work out what to do, suddenly Bones is the cautious one saying we need to do an autopsy. If Sulu dies, if we don't resolve this, Sulu's dead either way. But we don't want to kill you till we're sure what we're doing. And Spock is like the man of action, going, no, we need to save
Spock
Sulu.
Also, here's what I thought was interesting about that. Spock says, I actually live this, which to you is theoretical. I have a human half and an alien half. And my alien half is all good and my human half is all evil, so I understand your dichotomy. He didn't actually say those words. I'm reading into it. But the reason why Spock is a sympathetic character is he's not a perfect Vulcan. He's not a pure Vulcan.
That's true.
On Next Gen and all the other sequels, when they have pure Vulcans, they never work. They never work because they're not dramatic, because they don't have any internal conflict. The internal conflict of Spock is that he tries to live up to a standard of an archetypical stoic. He's like a Hwynham from Jonathan Swift, but he can't, because he's got an emotional side, a human side that he has to keep suppressed. He has to fight his human nature. And since every human on Earth has to fight his human nature, thanks to the fall of man, we understand it. They don't use those terms in Star Trek because Gene Roddenberry was a secularist, and that's why the good and evil in this show was depicted in purely secular terms. According to evolutionary psychology, our evil side must have some good function, otherwise it would have been evolved out of existence. It can't just be a corruption of something noble. I'm a Christian. I don't buy that theory. I think all evil things are a corruption of something noble. And the more corrupt they get, the weaker they get. So in real life, evil Kirk would not have even appeared on the transporter pad, because he would have been just a bunch of ashes flittering. Because he would have been completely cowardly, completely ignorant, because knowledge is a virtue. Completely passionless, because passion is also a good. It also can be a source of virtue. You see what I'm saying? Well, I think what they were trying to do was, like I said before, they're trying to do superego and id, or they were trying to do passion and intellect, or something like that. And they actually said in the show that's the way they were dividing it up. But I noticed that Spock is not the indecisive wimp in this show.
No.
So they said clearly the intellect is not the source of indecisiveness, and Bones is not impulsive. So clearly the passion side is not the source of impulse. So they kind of didn't play their theme out completely consistently, because it would have also been interesting. Now I'm not sure they should have done this or could have done this, to have when Kirk is divided into two sections. What if Bones had been loyal to one side, the more human, earthly side, the funny side, and Spock had been more loyal to the intellectual, the dispassionate, unemotional side? Because that's not what the division was. He wasn't actually divided into body and soul. He wasn't divided into intellect and passion. They kind of combined several ideas to make it darkness and light, or something, or id and superego.
Oh, one thing of note, when the alien creature is unsuccessfully reintegrated and dies, McCoy says,
"He's dead, Jim."
Which, is that
He's
the first
dead,
time
Jim.
he says that?
This is only episode 5. This may well be the landmark "He's dead, Jim" beginning. I can't swear for sure, but if it is the alien puppy with the unicorn horn, that's great. the first critter that dies is the good and evil animal could not integrate. Oh, and by the way, they do say, Spock does say to Kirk, you will not die because your intellect will allow you to force your intellect and your passions together, and you won't be afraid. You'll rise to the occasion, and the animal could not, because it was only an animal. And that's kind of interesting idea, that the good side can embrace the bad side and use it, turn it to good. It's actually kind of a Christian idea if you think about it.
Well, yeah.
But the animal side can't integrate the good side. Even though, and this is what puzzles me, why does evil Kirk break down crying at the end? He gives up. Was that clear to you why that was supposed to happen? What's the psychological reasoning behind that? He's shouting, I don't want to go back, and then he starts blubbering, and Kirk gives him a hug.
He has no self-control. He's driven purely by his passions, and he can't.
Does he realize
maybe he
realizes?
Yeah, maybe
Does
he
he realize?
realizes he can't actually survive like this. This will destroy. Like he's doomed if he stays like this. Maybe that's his realization.
Yeah.
At the end.
Yeah. If so, then that's I think that is supposed to be the general story arc. Is what we call good and evil isn't actually good and evil. It's actually passionate and intellect, and we're supposed to realize that both halves are necessary for our decisive functioning. Because Kirk looks all squared away at the end, right? He's all, Let me ask one other question. Yeoman Rand comes up to Kirk at the end and starts to. It sounds like she's about to apologize, and he cuts her off and says everything's okay. I didn't get that. Do you know what scene I'm talking about? It's like at the very end, right before Spock leers at her.
Yeah.
Was she about to say, I'm off duty at 6 bells, so come down to my cabin and we'll talk about it over wine? Or was she going to say,
Maybe.
I'm taking you up on report, or I'm going to put in a complaint at Starfleet? What was she going to say? I kind of liked you when you were evil? Because there is an episode of Ronda One Half where the main character girl, Akane, gets cut into a good and evil half, and the evil half is actually quite a seductress, is quite alluring. And later on, when she's reintegrated, Ranma is complaining because this is a comedy, so everyone's complaining about something. He says, "I liked you better when you were evil. You were sexier too," and she slaps him. So
It's fair.
So what was Yeoman Rand about to say to Kirk at the very end? Something,
I don't know.
Something
That's a good
ameliorating?
question.
Was she going to apologize for, I'm sorry that I scratched you. I'm sorry that I didn't let you attack me.
Well, maybe it was just the whole situation is awkward. How are we going to go back to the way things were after sort of seeing all of this side of you? And he's like, no, it'll be okay.
That's a good point.
Maybe it's just that.
She saw his raw animal nature, and now she knows that he's really attracted to her. I mean, because now she knows. You see, and girls are not supposed to know if the guy's attracted to her because we pretend we are whether we are or not because we're men, or at least I don't know. Excuse me, cads do. Real men are pretty honest with their approach. So, I was watching the first half of the show, wondering why they didn't just beam down some heating equipment to Sulu, and I was really happy that halfway through they did actually mention that. They said in passing, we tried to beam some stuff
it
down,
didn't work, yeah.
and it didn't work. So, but I also think that whenever there's an unruly student at Starfleet Academy, they should just coat him with yellow ore from that planet, shove him through. Because I noticed that the indecisive Kirk did try for a while to be commanding, but he just didn't have the gumption.
No, he didn't have the.
Maybe he could have learned,
No, I guess the implication was he was going to get more indecisive and more feckless as the two diverged more and more.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
So we need the yin and yang. We need a jerk side and we need a wimpy side to us to become whole characters.
Yeah.
Because I thought they made it clear that when they said good and evil at the beginning, that they later corrected themselves, and Spock said that no, it's not really good and evil. It's your passionate side and your intellectual side. So, or as I like to say, wimpy Kirk and jerk
Kirk. Yeah. Well.
So there we go. But it's still a good, interesting episode because look, if nothing else, it's thought provoking, and I haven't seen anything like that in recent Star Trek. On the other hand, I haven't seen anything written by people like Richard Matheson, who's a pretty...
Have you watched any recent Star Trek, I guess?
I'm sorry, it's dead to me. I lost interest in it.
That's fair. I agree, too.
I think they should shove the whole show through the transporter and get jerk Trek is what we're being shown. I want to see good Trek, even if it's indecisive. Because, of course, Captain Picard was a little indecisive, wasn't he? So maybe he's the good side of Star Trek. So,
well, on that note, thank you everyone for joining us. Like, share, and subscribe, and we'll talk to you next time.